When the power grid dies, the law dies with it. Most people beg for mercy from the tyrants who take over. We build traps to break their bones. The smell of sulfur and burning pine fills my lungs. A hound snarls in the freezing dark. Heavy boots crunch on the blood-soaked snow just inches from my face. You cannot negotiate with a dictator. You can only make him bleed. My name is Vance Tolliver. I am going to burn the Ironclad Vanguard to the ground. This is Rogue Militia. Chapter 1. The Dying Grid. Vance Tolliver stood before the open access panel of the Miller Valley Electrical Substation. He wiped grease from his hands with a dirty rag. The low hum of the massive transformers vibrated through the soles of his work boots. It was a normal Tuesday afternoon. The sky above Washington State was a clear, piercing blue. He reached for his voltage meter. A sharp click echoed in his ears. It sounded like a massive static discharge. Then came the silence. The heavy, bone-deep vibration of the transformers died instantly. The cooling fans spun down to a halt. Vance frowned and tapped his meter. The digital screen was blank. He pulled his phone from his pocket. The screen was black. He held down the power button. Nothing happened. A cold knot formed in his stomach. The silence around the substation was wrong. It was too absolute. Vance stepped out of the chain-link enclosure. He looked down the hill toward Interstate 5. The steady roar of afternoon traffic was gone. In its place was the screeching of tires and the sickening crunch of metal on metal. Plumes of black smoke began to curl into the sky from the highway. He looked up. A passenger jet angled steeply toward the horizon. It left no white contrail. The engines were dead. It dropped in terrible silence, disappearing behind the distant tree line. A moment later, a muted thud rolled across the valley. An electromagnetic pulse. Vance did not waste time staring. His civil engineering background told him everything he needed to know. The grid was gone. It was not coming back. He dropped his tool belt, grabbed his backpack, and started walking. He had 4 miles to cover to get home. He kept to the side streets and avoiding the main roads. The chaos was already spreading. Neighbors stood on their lawns, shaking their dead phones. A woman wept over the hood of a stalled minivan. 2 men argued at an intersection where a delivery truck had plowed into a sedan. Vance kept his head down. He moved fast. He ignored the pleas for help. It went against his nature, but a brutal calculus took over his mind. Every second he spent out here was a second his family was unprotected. He reached his neighborhood just as the afternoon sun began to dip behind the Cascades. His house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. The front door was slightly ajar. Vance pulled his pocket knife and pushed the door open. Alara stood in the kitchen. She was leaning over the island counter. Her hands gripped the marble edge so hard her knuckles were white. She wore her hospital scrubs. They were smeared with fresh, bright red blood. Vance let out a breath he did not know he was holding. He closed the door behind him and locked the deadbolt. Alara looked up. Her eyes were wide, but her voice was flat and clinical. "It is gone, Vance. Everything is gone." "Are you hurt?" Vance asked. He walked over and inspected the blood on her clothes. "Not mine," she said. "I was in the emergency room when the power cut. The backup generators failed to kick in. They just fried. The monitoring machines died. The ventilators stopped. People were crashing their cars outside. The sliding doors would not open. We had to break the glass to get the trauma patients inside. It was a slaughterhouse." She walked to the sink and turned the faucet. A sputtering stream of water coughed out, turned brown, then ran clear. "We are losing water pressure," Vance said. "The municipal pumps run on electricity. Once the gravity tanks drain, the pipes go dry." Alara nodded. She had spent 12 years doing triage. She knew how to pivot from shock to action. "Where is Beckett?" Vance asked. "In his room," Alara said. "He walked home from the high school. He is scared." Vance headed down the hall. He found his 16-year-old son sitting on the edge of his bed. Beckett still wore his track uniform. He was staring at a dead tablet in his hands. "Dad, the internet is down," Beckett said. His voice cracked. "I cannot reach anyone." "Put it away," Vance said. He kept his voice steady. He needed his son focused. "We need your help, Beck. The power is not coming back on. We need to prep the house." Beckett looked up, confusion written across his face. "What do you mean it is not coming back on?" "Just do what I say," Vance told him. "Go to the bathrooms, plug the tubs, fill them with cold water, fill every bucket and pot you can find. Go." Beckett dropped the tablet and hurried past him. Vance went to the hall closet and pulled down the attic stairs. He climbed up into the stifling heat. He dragged 3 heavy plastic storage bins toward the opening. He lowered them down to the hallway. Alara was already sorting through their camping gear in the living room. She opened the first bin. It held 50 pounds of rice, dried beans, and 20 boxes of military rations. The second bin held propane canisters, a camp stove, and water filtration pumps. Vance walked to his home office. He pushed aside his drafting table and opened the floor safe. He pulled out a matte black pump-action, 12-gauge shotgun. He set it on the desk. He reached back in and pulled out his 5.56 6mm rifle. He grabbed 6 loaded magazines and a box of buckshot. He carried the weapons out to the living room. Alara looked at the guns. She did not say a word. She just went to the linen closet and pulled out dark-colored blankets. "Tape these over the windows," she told Beckett. "No light gets out tonight." They worked in silence as the last light of day faded. They moved through the house like ghosts. Vance secured the sliding glass doors with thick wooden dowels. He drove 3-inch screws into the frames of the ground floor windows. Every entry point was sealed. The house grew pitch black. Alara lit a single battery-powered camping lantern. She placed it on the floor in the center of the living room. The dim light cast long, nervous shadows against the walls. They sat on the floor around the lantern. Beckett hugged his knees to his chest. He looked at the rifle resting across his father's lap. "What happened to the planes, Dad?" Beckett whispered. "I saw one crash on my way home." Vance looked at his son. A massive surge of energy destroyed the microchips. "Everything modern is dead." "Are the police coming?" Beckett asked. Vance shook his head. "There are no police anymore, Beck. There is no fire department, there is no grocery store. We only have what is inside these walls." The reality hung heavy in the stale air of the closed house. Alara reached out and took Beckett by the hand. She squeezed it hard. Her hands were clean now, but Vance could still smell the copper tang of blood on her skin. They sat in silence for 2 hours. The neighborhood outside was dead quiet. There were no dogs barking. There were no sirens. The absence of modern noise was suffocating. Then, a sound broke the stillness. Vance tightened his grip on the rifle. It started as a low, mechanical rumble. It was far away, but growing steadily closer. "Diesel engines," Vance muttered. "Older diesel engines do not rely on computer chips to run. They can survive an electromagnetic pulse." The heavy rumble turned into a deep, aggressive roar. It sounded like multiple heavy vehicles moving in convoy. Vance stood up. He motioned for Alara and Beckett to stay down. He crept to the front window. He carefully peeled back a corner of the dark blanket. Headlights pierced the gloom of the street. 3 massive, up-armored personnel carriers rolled slowly down the asphalt. They were painted flat olive drab. Heavy steel plates were welded over the windows. Men in tactical gear sat on the roofs behind mounted machine guns. Vance felt a cold sweat break out on his neck. These were not the National Guard. The uniforms were mismatched. Some wore woodland camouflage. Others wore black tactical gear. All of them wore an armband bearing a crude, stenciled steel fist. The lead vehicle stopped at the intersection. The engine idled with a menacing growl. A loud burst of static hissed through the night air. A mounted loudspeaker on the lead vehicle crackled to life. A voice boomed through the neighborhood. It was calm, measured, and entirely without mercy. "Attention, citizens of Miller Valley. This is Brigadier Declan Haig of the Ironclad Vanguard. The federal government has fallen. The military is disbanded. We are your new authority. Effective immediately, this town is under martial law." Vance let the blanket drop. He looked back at his wife. Alara had moved to the desk. She was loading shells into the shotgun, one by one. The loudspeaker crackled again. "A strict curfew is in place. Anyone caught outside their homes will be shot on sight. Anyone caught hoarding medical supplies or fuel will be executed. We will begin house-to-house inspections at dawn. Have your doors unlocked. Resistance is suicide. Welcome to the new world." Chapter 2. The Iron Rule. 21 days. That was all it took for Miller Valley to become an open-air prison. The power grid remained dead. The military never arrived. The Ironclad Vanguard held the town by the throat. They moved fast during those first 3 weeks. They erected checkpoints at every major intersection. They strung coils of rusted razor wire across the highway on ramps. They confiscated civilian generators, solar panels, and food stockpiles. Anyone who resisted simply disappeared in the night. The town square was packed. 200 shivering people stood shoulder to shoulder in the freezing wind. The smell of wood smoke and unwashed bodies hung heavy in the damp air. Vance Tolliver kept his arm wrapped tight around his son. Beckett was trembling. Ilara stood close on Vance's other side. Her eyes were fixed on the men in mismatched camouflage uniforms circling the crowd. The Vanguard guards held their rifles at the low ready. Their faces were hidden behind black tactical balaclavas. The temperature was 22 degrees. Thin snow flurries danced in the gray morning light. Brigadier Declan Haig stood on the flatbed of a heavy military transport truck. He did not look angry. He looked perfectly calm. His uniform was immaculate. His black combat boots were polished to a dull shine. Beside him knelt a man. It was Arthur Miller. He was a retired postal worker who lived 3 streets over from the Tollivers. Arthur had a swollen eye and a split lip. His hands were bound tight behind his back with thick plastic zip ties. He was crying. Haig raised a battery-powered megaphone to his mouth. His voice echoed off the brick facades of the empty storefronts. "We are a community," Haig said. His tone was smooth and authoritative. "We survive together. We share our resources. That is the only way we beat this darkness. When one of us lies to the collective, we all suffer." Haig reached down to the truck bed. He picked up a small silver cylinder. It was a single, dented can of sliced peaches. Arthur Miller hid this beneath his floorboards, Haig announced. He denied having extra provisions during the mandatory census. He stole from the community stockpile. He stole from your starving children. Arthur wept openly now. He struggled against his plastic bindings. "Please," Arthur begged. His voice cracked with terror. "My wife is sick. She is diabetic. She needs the sugar. Just let me take it to her. I will work double shifts on the wood detail. Please." Haig lowered the megaphone. He drew a sidearm from his hip holster. It was a black 9mm pistol. He did not hesitate. He did not blink. Haig pressed the muzzle against the back of Arthur Miller's head and pulled the trigger. The gunshot cracked like thunder in the freezing air. Arthur slumped forward. He hit the ribbed metal bed of the truck with a heavy thud. Dark red blood began to pool beneath his head, dripping slowly over the edge of the tailgate. Several people in the crowd screamed. A guard fired a 3-round burst into the air. The crowd instantly fell dead silent. "Clean this up," Haig told his men. He looked out at the horrified faces in the square. "The new quota for chopped firewood is due at sunset. Anyone who falls short loses their dinner ration." Dismissed. The walk back to the house was a blur of gray slush and heavy footsteps. Nobody spoke. Once inside, Vance locked the heavy deadbolt. He shoved the thick wooden dowels back into the sliding door tracks. He double-checked the screws holding the window frame shut. They gathered in the dark kitchen. The house was freezing. They had run out of propane for the indoor space heater 2 days ago. "We cannot stay here," Ilara whispered. She paced the short length of the kitchen counter. Her medical instincts were fighting a losing battle against raw panic. "Haig is going to kill us all. It is just a matter of time before they search the houses again." Vance rubbed his tired eyes. He knew she was right. The Vanguard had conducted a strict census during the first week. They took names, ages, and professions. They documented every usable skill in Miller Valley. "Haig knows exactly what I do," Vance said. "He stopped a supply convoy near the power substation yesterday. I heard the perimeter guards talking. Haig wants to turn this valley into a fortress. He needs a massive perimeter wall to keep out the desperate refugees walking up from the city. He needs structural engineers to design the guard towers and reinforce the steel gates. They are drafting a forced labor crew tomorrow morning." Ilara stopped pacing. Her breath plumed in the cold kitchen air. "And they know I am a trauma nurse. The Vanguard took heavy casualties fighting a rival group on the highway last week. Their medics are overwhelmed. 2 guards came to the triage clinic yesterday. They asked about my shift schedule. They are going to take me to their compound." Vance felt a cold, heavy weight settle in his chest. They would not take Beckett. A 16-year-old boy with no tactical skills was completely useless to Haig. Beckett would be left to freeze in the house alone, or worse, put in the general labor pool to die of exhaustion. "They are going to separate us," Vance said. His voice was grim. "They will take you to their clinic. They will chain me to the wall project. They will leave Beck with nothing." Beckett sat at the kitchen table. His face was pale. "What do we do, Dad? We cannot fight an army. They have armored trucks. They have machine guns. They execute people over canned fruit." Vance looked at his son. Then he looked at his wife. He saw the same hardened resolve in Ilara's eyes that he felt churning in his own gut. They were done hiding. They were done playing by the rules of a tyrant. We do not fight them, Vance said. We leave. Ilara nodded. When? The Vanguard patrols are everywhere. They have tracker dogs. They have thermal scopes on their rifles. If we run during the day, they will shoot us in the back. Vance walked to the front window. He peered through a tiny slit in the heavy blackout blankets. The sky outside was darkening fast. The wind was picking up. It rattled the loose window panes. The gray clouds were thick and heavy with moisture. I checked the old analog barometer in the garage, Vance said. The atmospheric pressure is dropping fast, faster than I have ever seen. There is a massive storm system moving over the Cascade Mountains. It is going to hit us tonight. A blizzard, Ilara said. A bad one, Vance confirmed. Whiteout conditions. The temperature will drop below zero. The heavy snow will cover our tracks. The howling wind will mask our scent from the dogs. The thermal scopes will be completely blind in heavy snowfall. It is our only window to get out of this valley. Are we going into the mountains? Beckett asked. Yes, Vance said. We pack the extreme cold weather gear. We take the remaining military survival rations. We take the rifles and your mother's medical kit. We carry only what we can fit in our rucksacks. We leave everything else behind. Ilara went to the living room. She pulled out their heavy winter coats. She stacked thermal base layers, wool socks, and waterproof hiking boots. We need to move fast. If they catch us past curfew, they will shoot us just like Arthur. Vance went to his home office. He pulled out his weapon cleaning kit. He began to break down the 5.56mm rifle. He checked the internal action. He oiled the bolt carrier group. He made sure every moving part was flawless. In freezing temperatures, metal contracted. Dirty guns jammed. He could not afford a single malfunction tonight. He loaded his spare magazines with green-tip penetrator rounds. The Vanguard guards wore heavy ceramic body armor. Standard hollow-point bullets would just bounce off their chest plates. He needed armor-piercing capability if they ran into a patrol. He handed 3 spare magazines to Ilara. She slid them into the deep cargo pockets of her parka. The house grew pitch black. The wind outside began to howl. It shrieked through the eaves of the roof. Snow began to pelt the glass behind the blackout blankets. It sounded like handfuls of sharp gravel thrown against the house. Vance strapped on his chest rig. He adjusted the nylon webbing over his winter coat. The rig held his 2-way radio, spare ammunition, and a fixed-blade survival knife. He handed a smaller tactical pack to Beckett. "Keep this tight against your back," Vance told his son. "Do not let the shoulder straps hang loose. They will catch on the brush in the dark. You follow my footsteps exactly. Step where I step. If I stop, you stop. If I drop to the ground, you drop. Do you understand?" Beckett nodded. He slung the pack over his shoulders. His hands were trembling slightly, but his jaw was set tight. "I understand." Ilara zipped up her heavy coat. She checked the trauma bag one last time. Tourniquets, hemostatic gauze, quick clot powder, broad-spectrum antibiotics. She had raided the hospital pharmacy on the very first day of the collapse. It was their most valuable asset. She took a piece of charred wood from the fireplace. She smeared the black ash over her cheeks and forehead. She handed the charcoal to Vance and Beckett. "Camouflage," Ilara said. "Pale skin reflects moonlight. We need to be invisible." Vance blackened his face. He checked his watch. It was 10 o'clock at night. The Vanguard curfew patrols would be changing their shift soon. The blizzard outside was reaching a deafening fever pitch. He walked to the front door and gripped the cold brass deadbolt. "Once we go through this door, we cannot come back," Vance said. His voice was a low rumble. "We are dead men walking in this town. We run hard. We run quiet. We do not stop until we reach the deep timber of the tree line." Ilara drew her pistol. She racked the steel slide, chambering a hollow point round. "Open it." Vance turned the lock. He pulled the heavy front door open. The freezing wind hit them like a physical blow. A wall of blinding white snow swirled in the total darkness of the neighborhood. Vance stepped out onto the porch, leaning into the freezing gale. He took one step down toward the snowy yard when the blinding, pure white beam of a high-powered vehicle searchlight swept across the street, cut through the falling snow, and locked directly onto his chest. Chapter 3. Through the Wire. The brilliant white beam of the searchlight hit Vance square in the chest. He froze, his muscles locked tight. He stopped breathing. The light glared through the heavy snowfall, blinding him entirely. He waited for the shout. He waited for the crack of a rifle. Nothing happened. The beam did not stop. It swept past him, dragging across the front of his house, illuminating the falling snow like static on a dead television screen. It was a sweeping patrol. A heavy transport truck was crawling down the cross street a block away. The guard on the roof was just panning the spotlight back and forth blindly through the blizzard. Vance exhaled. The frozen air burned his lungs. He reached back and pushed Alara and Beckett flat against the brick siding of the porch. They waited. The low rumble of the diesel engine slowly faded into the howling wind. "Move," Vance whispered. They stepped off the porch and plunged into the knee-deep snow. The storm was vicious. The wind screamed through the bare branches of the oak trees. It bit at their exposed skin. Vance kept his head down. He followed the natural slope of the land, moving through the dark backyards. He knew this town better than the Vanguard ever could. He had spent 10 years designing its municipal infrastructure. He knew the water mains. He knew the sewer lines. Most importantly, he knew the stormwater drainage network. They reached the chain-link fence bordering the old middle school field. Vance dropped to his knees. He brushed away the fresh powder. His heavy gloves scraped against something hard. He cleared the area to reveal a massive cast-iron storm grate. This access point fed directly into the main outflow tunnel. The tunnel ran straight beneath the heavily guarded highway and emptied into a creek just past the tree line. It was their only way past the Vanguard checkpoints. Vance pulled a short steel pry bar from his pack. He wedged it under the lip of the grate. The iron was frozen solid to the concrete rim. He put his entire body weight onto the bar. He grunted. The metal groaned, cracked the ice seal, and popped open. He slid the heavy grate aside. A blast of warm, foul-smelling air rose from the dark hole. It smelled of rust, decaying leaves, and stagnant water. "Go," Vance told his son. "Climb down the ladder. Keep your hands tight on the rungs. They will be slippery." Beckett swung his legs into the hole. He disappeared into the pitch black. Alara went next. She handed her rifle down to Beckett before climbing. Vance followed last. He grabbed the iron grate and dragged it back over the opening, sealing them inside the earth. The darkness was absolute. The howling of the blizzard above was instantly muted, replaced by the steady, hollow drip of water echoing down the concrete tunnel. Vance reached into his chest rig. He clicked on a small tactical flashlight fitted with a red lens. The dull crimson glow washed over the damp walls. The pipe was 8 feet wide in diameter. A shallow stream of freezing water ran down the center. "Stay close to the walls," Vance said. "The water in the middle is moving fast. If you slip, you will freeze." They began to walk. The concrete was slick with algae and winter slime. Their boots echoed softly in the cavernous space. The air was thick and difficult to breathe. Every few minutes, they heard the heavy, muffled thud of a Vanguard transport truck rolling directly over their heads on the highway above. The vibrations shook loose dirt from the ceiling. They walked for 40 minutes in the freezing damp. Beckett was shivering violently. His teeth chattered loudly enough to echo. Alara kept a firm grip on his shoulder, guiding him forward in the red light. The tunnel began to slope upward. The air grew significantly colder. A faint sliver of gray light appeared in the distance. "Kill the light," Alara whispered. Vance turned off the flashlight. They crept toward the exit. The outflow pipe ended at a steep concrete embankment overlooking the frozen creek. Beyond the creek lay the dense, black timber of the Cascade Mountains. They were almost out. Vance moved to the edge of the pipe. He crouched low and peered out into the snowstorm. 50 yards to their left was a temporary Vanguard outpost. A heavy canvas tent was erected near the creek bed. A portable diesel generator chugged loudly in the snow. 2 guards stood near a burn barrel, warming their hands. They wore thick winter gear and carried short-barreled rifles slung across their chests. "We have to cross the creek right here," Vance whispered back to his family. "We slip down the embankment, cross the ice, and vanish into the trees. Keep low. Do not make a sound." Vance stepped out of the pipe. The wind immediately tore at his clothes. He slid down the snowy concrete bank. His boots hit the frozen surface of the creek. He turned and caught Alara as she slid down behind him. Beckett came last. He stepped out of the pipe. His foot hit a patch of solid black ice on the sloped concrete. His boot shot out from under him. Beckett fell hard onto his back. The heavy tactical pack cushioned his fall, but the sling of his rifle slipped. The steel barrel of the weapon swung out and slammed violently against the metal rim of the outflow pipe. The sharp, metallic clank cut through the white noise of the blizzard like a gunshot. Vance froze. He looked toward the Vanguard tent. The 2 guards instantly stopped talking. One of them kicked the burn barrel, killing the fire to preserve their night vision. The other guard unslung his rifle. He tapped his radio, then pointed a heavy, military-grade flashlight directly toward the creek. The beam swept across the snow and stopped dead on the drainage pipe. "Hey," a rough voice shouted through the wind. "Who is down there? Show your hands." Vance felt a cold, heavy dread pool in his stomach. The guard was walking toward them. The crunch of his boots on the snow grew louder. He was alone. The other guard was staying back to cover the tent. Vance looked at the creek. The ice was totally exposed. If they ran now, the guard would shoot them in the back. There was no cover. There was no way to hide. "Dad," Beckett whispered. His voice was a thin, terrified squeak. "I am sorry. I am so sorry." "Quiet," Alara hissed. She drew her 9mm pistol. "No," Vance said. He pushed her hand down. "A gunshot will bring the entire camp. I will handle it." Vance drew the fixed-blade survival knife from his chest rig. The steel blade was 5 inches long. He pressed himself flat against the concrete wall of the embankment, hiding in the deep shadow right beside the pipe entrance. He waited. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was a builder. He fixed things. He had never taken a human life. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. The brutal calculus returned. It was this man, or it was his son. The choice was not a choice at all. The guard reached the edge of the embankment. The bright beam of his flashlight pierced the tunnel. "I said, show your hands," the guard yelled. He leaned forward, peering into the dark pipe. Vance lunged out of the shadow. He grabbed the barrel of the guard's rifle with his left hand, shoving it violently upward. The flashlight dropped into the snow. Vance drove his right hand forward. He plunged the heavy steel blade deep into the soft hollow of the guard's throat, just above the collar of his tactical vest. The guard's eyes went wide. He made a wet, suffocating gasp. His hands scrambled frantically at Vance's chest rig. Vance twisted the blade and shoved the man backward. They crashed into the snow together. Vance pinned the man down with his knees. He pulled the knife free and drove it down again, burying it in the side of the guard's neck. Hot, thick blood sprayed across Vance's hands and face. It steamed in the freezing air. The guard twitched violently for 3 seconds, then went entirely limp. Vance stayed on top of the body. He was panting. His hands shook uncontrollably. He stared down at the dead man's face. The metallic smell of fresh blood mixed with the cold snow. He felt sick. "Move," a cold voice said. Ilara was right beside him. She did not look at his face. She did not ask if he was okay. 12 years of trauma triage had stripped away her squeamishness. Blood was just fluid. Flesh was just tissue. "Help me move him," she ordered. Vance snapped out of his shock. He grabbed the dead man by the tactical vest. Together they dragged the heavy corpse out of sight, stuffing it deep into the shadows of the concrete outflow pipe. Alara knelt in the snow. She kicked fresh, white powder over the massive pool of red blood, hiding the gruesome stain. She picked up the guard's dropped flashlight and turned it off. Then she reached into the dead man's vest, unclipped his two-way radio, and twisted the volume knob to 0. "We bought ourselves maybe 5 minutes before the other guard comes looking for him," Alara said. Her voice was completely hollow. "We cross the ice right now." They scrambled across the frozen creek. The ice cracked under their weight, but it held. They breached the opposite bank and threw themselves into the dense, black cover of the pine trees. They pushed deep into the timber. The heavy branches of the pines broke the worst of the wind. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs felt like lead. They were finally out of Miller Valley. They were in the wild. Vance leaned against a massive tree trunk. He wiped his bloody hands on his snow-covered pants. He looked back toward the town. Then the wail began. It started low, then rose into a deafening, mechanical shriek. The town's emergency air raid siren was spinning up. The piercing noise cut straight through the howling blizzard. It echoed off the mountain ridges. "They found the body," Vance said. Before Alara could answer, another sound drifted through the dark woods. It came from the direction of the creek. It was sharp, rhythmic, and terrifying. It was the deep, aggressive baying of Vanguard tracker hounds catching a fresh scent in the snow. Chapter 4. The Cascade Hermit. The barking grew louder. Deep, tearing sounds ripped through the freezing air. Vance pushed Beckett forward. The snow was waist-deep in the drifts. Every step was a physical battle against the mountain. Vance felt the bitter cold burning his lungs. His thighs cramped with the violent effort of breaking the trail. "Keep moving," Vance rasped. Alara fell. She hit a buried root and went down hard in the deep white powder. Vance grabbed the collar of her heavy coat. He hauled her back to her feet. She did not complain. She just gripped her pistol tighter and kept pushing forward. The hounds were close. Vance could hear the heavy snapping of frozen branches behind them. Then came the harsh shouts of the Vanguard scouts. They were moving fast on snowshoes. They were closing the gap. "We cannot outrun them," Vance said. He stopped behind a massive fallen cedar. The torn roots formed a natural wall of frozen wood and packed dirt. "Get behind the roots," Vance ordered. Ilara pushed Beckett into the hollow beneath the trunk. She dropped to her knees and raised her 9mm pistol. Her hands were shaking violently from the cold. Vance leveled his rifle over the thick wood. He rested the steel barrel on a frozen root. He clicked the safety off. He had 2 spare magazines left in his rig. There were at least 5 men coming through the trees. He heard the metallic clatter of their tactical gear. Flashlight beams cut through the driving blizzard. The bright white circles swept across the tree trunks, searching the shadows. The dogs snarled. "There!" A rough voice shouted from the dark. Behind the dead tree, the hounds lunged forward. 2 massive dogs broke from the tree line. Their jaws snapped. White foam flew from their muzzles as they scrambled over the snowdrifts. Vance tightened his finger on the trigger. A sharp crack echoed from the high ridge above them. It was not the rapid popping sound of an assault rifle. It was the heavy, deafening boom of a high-caliber hunting rifle. The first dog dropped instantly. The heavy bullet took it in the chest. The second dog yelped, lost its footing, and skidded sideways into a snowdrift. Another shot rang out. The lead Vanguard scout fell backward. His heavy flashlight tumbled into the snow, the beam pointing up into the falling flakes. "Take cover," one of the scouts screamed. 3 more shots rained down from the dark ridge. The sniper was fast. The rifle action cycled with deadly precision. 2 more scouts hit the ground in a spray of dark red blood. The remaining men did not return fire. They broke their line and ran back the way they came, disappearing completely into the blizzard. Absolute silence fell over the woods. The only sound was the wind howling through the heavy pine branches. Vance did not lower his rifle. He scanned the dark, snowy ridge. He could see nothing. "Stand up slow," a rough voice commanded. "Drop the weapons." The voice came from the right. A tall figure stepped out from behind a thick pine tree. He wore a ragged canvas coat lined with sheepskin. A thick gray beard covered his lower face. He held a custom bolt-action rifle leveled right at the center of Vance's chest. "Drop it," the man repeated, "or you join the dogs." Vance slowly lowered the barrel of his rifle. He set it carefully on the snow. Ilara placed her pistol right beside it. "We are not Vanguard," Vance said. His voice was hoarse. "I know," the man grunted. "Vanguard soldiers do not drag crying kids through the deep snow. Turn around, hands where I can see them." Vance raised his hands. The man stepped closer. He smelled heavily of wood smoke, old leather, and pine pitch. He kicked Vance's rifle further away into the brush. "Who are you?" Ilara asked. "Names do not matter," the man said. "My name is Boyd. You are trespassing on my land. Grab your gear and keep walking north. If you stop within 5 miles of my property, I will shoot you myself." "We will freeze to death out here," Vance said. "We just need shelter for a few hours, just until the storm breaks." "Not my problem," Boyd said. He kept the heavy rifle steady. "Keep moving." Vance looked down at Beckett. The boy's lips were entirely blue. His teeth rattled together so hard Vance could hear the clicking sound over the wind. They would not survive another hour in this extreme cold. They would just go to sleep in the snow and never wake up. Vance took a slow step forward. "I cannot let my son freeze." Boyd shifted his aim. The heavy barrel pointed straight at Vance's face. "Do not test me, city boy. I just put 3 men in the ground. You think I care about one more?" Ilara stepped right between them. She ignored the rifle, pointed at her husband. She stared intently at Boyd's left arm. The old man favored his right side. His left arm hung slightly limp at his side. The thick canvas sleeve of his coat was stained with a dark, oily crust. It smelled faintly of rotting meat beneath the heavy odor of wood smoke. "You have sepsis," Ilara said flatly. Boyd flinched. He pulled his arm back a fraction of an inch. "Shut your mouth. I am a trauma nurse," Ilara continued. Her voice was pure ice. "That smell is necrotic tissue. You took a bullet or a bad cut. You tried to clean it yourself, but the infection is spreading up your blood vessels. You have a fever right now. I can see the sweat freezing on your forehead." Boyd glared at her. His grip on the rifle tightened, but his hands were trembling slightly. If you do not get broad-spectrum antibiotics into your system within 24 hours, you will lose the arm, Alara said. And out here in the wild, losing an arm means you die slowly. Boyd stood perfectly still. The wind ripped through the small clearing, kicking up a cloud of white powder. He looked at the dead bodies of the Vanguard scouts. He looked at the shivering teenager on the ground. I have the antibiotics in my pack, Alara said. I have sterile surgical tools. I can clean the wound. I can save your arm. But we need 4 walls and a fire. We trade medical care for shelter. A long, heavy silence stretched between them. Boyd slowly lowered his rifle. He spat a dark wad of chewing tobacco into the snow. Pick up your guns, Boyd growled. Make one wrong move in my cabin, and I will gut you while you sleep. They followed Boyd up a steep, treacherous trail. The snow was deep, but Boyd knew every hidden rock and root. They climbed for 30 agonizing minutes. Vance felt his lungs burning. His legs felt like dead weights dragging through the powder. The trees cleared near the top of the steep ridge. A small log cabin sat nestled against a massive granite rock face. It was completely hidden from the valley below. Thick wooden shutters covered the small glass windows. A heavy cast-iron chimney poked through the snow-covered roof, letting out a thin stream of gray smoke. Boyd unlocked the heavy oak door. Go inside. The cabin was boiling warm. A low fire crackled in a cast-iron stove in the corner. The walls were lined with canned goods, green ammunition boxes, and dried meat hanging from the wooden rafters. The air was thick with the smell of wood ash and old coffee. Beckett collapsed onto a small braided rug near the stove. He curled into a tight ball, shivering violently as the heat hit him. Alara immediately dropped her tactical pack. She pulled out an insulated thermal blanket and wrapped it tight around her son. Sit down, Alara told Boyd. Take off the coat. Boyd grunted. He leaned his custom rifle against the log wall. He slowly peeled off the heavy canvas coat. Underneath, his flannel shirt was soaked in yellow fluid and dried black blood. A deep, jagged laceration ran from his elbow to his shoulder. The skin around the deep wound was black and severely swollen. Dark red lines branched out from the cut, climbing up his neck toward his jaw. Alara opened her trauma kit. She pulled out a bottle of iodine, a sealed scalpel, and a foil packet of intravenous antibiotics. Hold his good arm, Alara told Vance. This is going to hurt. Vance gripped Boyd's right shoulder tight. Alara did not waste time with warnings. She poured the dark iodine directly into the open wound. Boyd let out a guttural hiss. His entire body locked rigid. He bit his lower lip until fresh blood ran down his chin, but he did not scream. Alara worked quickly and brutally. She cut away the dead skin with the scalpel. She flushed the wound with a large syringe of sterile saline. She prepared a thick needle and injected the heavy dose of antibiotics straight into his shoulder muscle. You will live, Alara said. She wrapped the arm tightly in clean white gauze. Keep it dry. Boyd slumped back in the wooden chair. His rough face was pale and slick with sweat. He breathed heavily through his nose. He looked at Alara, then at Vance. You handle a blade well for a city woman, Boyd muttered. Vance walked away from the wooden table. He moved to the small window facing the valley. He pushed the heavy wooden shutter open just a fraction of an inch. The glass was frosted over from the inside. He wiped it clean with his sleeve. From this high ridge, he had a clear, unobstructed view of the valley below. The blizzard was finally beginning to break. The thick clouds tore apart in the sky, revealing a pale, freezing moon. Vance pulled his binoculars from his pack. He pressed the cold rubber cups to his eyes. He focused the lenses on the dark tree line they had just escaped from. His stomach twisted into a cold, heavy knot. Dad, Beckett whispered from the floor. What is it? Vance could not speak. He lowered the binoculars and handed them to Boyd. The old hermit grabbed them with his good hand. He looked through the glass. A long line of bright orange lights snaked through the dark forest below. It was not the white beams of flashlights. It was raw fire. The Vanguard had brought up their heavy armored trucks. Dozens of men were moving in a wide line through the trees. They were using military-grade flamethrowers to set the dead brush and dry pine needles ablaze. They were creating a massive wall of fire, burning the forest to the ground to flush them out. They are burning the mountain, Boyd said. His voice was grim and tight, and they are heading straight for this ridge. Chapter 5. The Kill Box. Vance Tolliver dropped the binoculars. The wall of fire was moving fast. The wind pushed the hungry flames up the mountain slope, consuming the dead winter brush. Thick black smoke billowed into the cold night sky. Below the heavy smoke, the deep rumble of diesel engines shook the earth. "They know we are up here," Boyd said. He gritted his teeth and grabbed his heavy bolt-action rifle with his good hand. "The hounds caught my blood scent on the snow, or they tracked your boots. It does not matter now. They found us." "We have to run," Beckett said. His voice was thin and trembling. He looked toward the back door of the cabin. "Run where?" Boyd spat. "The fire is pushing up the southern draw. The sheer cliff face blocks the northern ridge. They have us boxed into this corner. If we leave the cabin, we die in the open snow." Vance looked at the terrain. The panic in his chest was a living thing, but he forced it down. He was a civil engineer. He saw the world in angles, structures, and load-bearing paths. The small cabin sat at the top of a narrow, steep chute flanked by massive granite boulders. There was only one way up for a large assault force. It was a natural choke point. "We do not run," Vance said. His voice was eerily steady. "We make them come to us on our terms." Vance turned to Boyd. "What do you have for heavy supplies?" "I need propane. I need loose nails. I need 50-pound test fishing line. I need anything that can create a concussive blast." Boyd stared at him for a fraction of a second. "I have 2 20-pound propane cylinders in the shed out back. I have 3 pounds of black powder I use for reloading my hunting shells. I have a heavy wooden bucket of rusty roofing nails." "Bring them all," Vance said. "Alara, get the 12-gauge shotguns. Take the shells apart. I need the raw gunpowder and the lead buckshot." They worked with frantic, terrified speed. The smell of sulfur and cold sweat filled the small room. Vance took the loose black powder and packed it tightly into short lengths of steel plumbing pipe he found under the workbench. He capped the steel ends, drilling small holes for friction fuses. He used heavy silver duct tape to strap the improvised pipe bombs directly to the steel bellies of the propane cylinders. He carried the massive rigs out into the snow. The freezing wind bit his exposed face. He positioned the cylinders carefully behind the large granite boulders, flanking the main trail. He buried them under a thin, deceptive layer of white powder. He ran the green, braided fishing line across the narrowest part of the path, pulling it taut 6 inches above the snow. He tied the ends carefully to the ignition fuses. It was a classic fatal funnel. The massive boulders forced any advancing troops into a tight, narrow space. The steep incline of the mountain slowed their physical movement. The tripwires were completely invisible in the dark and the driving snow. Vance went back inside the cabin. His bare hands were numb and bleeding from the cold metal. "Beckett, come here." His 16-year-old son walked over. Beckett was pale, but his eyes were focused. "You are the fastest person on this mountain," Vance told him. "You ran the 400-meter sprint in the state regionals last year. I need that exact speed tonight." Beckett swallowed hard. "What do you need me to do?" "I need bait," Vance said. Alara spun around from the table. She dropped a handful of shotgun shells. "No," she said. "Absolutely not." "Listen to me," Vance said. He looked at his wife, then back to his son. "The Vanguard troops have thermal scopes. They will see our heat signatures through the thin wooden walls. They will just surround the cabin and shoot us to pieces. When they get close to the boulders, I need you to run from the woodpile to the old outhouse. You have to draw their fire. You have to make them rush forward into the funnel." Alara grabbed Vance by the shoulder. Her fingers dug deep into his heavy winter coat. "You are sending him outside into a crossfire. They will kill him in the snow." "They will kill us all if they breach that front door," Vance said. His voice cracked with emotion, but he held her fierce gaze. "He is small. He is incredibly fast. The snow trenches will cover his legs. We need them to rush the traps, or we are dead." Alara looked at Beckett. She pulled him into a tight, desperate embrace, burying her face in his shoulder for just 1 second. "Keep your head down," she whispered. "Do not stop moving for any reason." A loud, metallic screech cut through the howling wind outside. It was the heavy loudspeaker on a Vanguard armored truck. The vehicle had stopped at the base of the ridge. "Vance Tolliver," Declan Haig announced. His voice echoed off the granite rocks. It was calm, measured, and completely devoid of human emotion. "You killed one of my men. You stole medical supplies. You are completely trapped. Come out with your hands empty. I will let your wife and your son live." "He is lying," Boyd muttered from the window. He rested his heavy rifle barrel on the wooden sill. "He just wants to save his own men the trouble of a hard firefight." "I know," Vance said. He racked the charging handle of his 5.56mm rifle. He chambered a green tip armor piercing round. "Beckett, go." Beckett slipped out the back door into the freezing night. He dropped onto his stomach and crawled through the deep snow trench toward the stacked woodpile. Heavy footsteps crunched on the frozen trail. The Vanguard scouts were moving up the mountain. They wore heavy ceramic body armor and winter camouflage. They moved in a tight, disciplined tactical formation. There were 12 men in the very first wave. They swept the dark tree line with their thermal rifle scopes. Vance pressed his cold cheek against his rifle stock. He aimed through a narrow crack in the window shutters. "Wait for it," he whispered to himself. The lead scout reached the edge of the granite boulders. He raised his gloved hand, signaling the entire squad to halt. Beckett bolted. He exploded from behind the woodpile. He sprinted across the open snowy yard. His track shoes dug hard into the packed powder. He moved with desperate, terrifying speed, a blur of motion in the dark. "Target moving right," a scout screamed. Gunfire erupted. The bright muzzle flashes lit up the dark woods like strobe lights. Bullets tore through the freezing air, shattering the wooden walls of the outhouse just as Beckett dove headfirst behind it. "Push up," the Vanguard squad leader yelled. "They are separated. Take the boy. Move." The Vanguard soldiers broke their disciplined line. They rushed forward, eager to flank the lone, helpless target. They charged right between the massive granite boulders. The lead soldier hit the fishing line. The invisible tripwire snapped tight. The friction fuse sparked in the snow. A deafening roar shook the mountain to its core. The black powder ignited the highly pressurized propane tanks. The blast was completely blinding. A massive ball of orange fire erupted from the snow, turning the freezing night into a wave of searing heat. The sheer shock wave shattered every glass window in the cabin. Thousands of rusty roofing nails and heavy steel buckshot tore through the air at supersonic speeds. The Vanguard front line ceased to exist. Armored men were thrown backward down the steep hill like broken toys. Screams of pure, unfiltered agony echoed over the high-pitched ringing in Vance's ears. The pristine snow turned black with soot and bright crimson with blood. "Fire!" Vance shouted. He squeezed his trigger. His rifle bucked hard against his shoulder. He sent 3-round bursts into the thick smoke, aiming for the surviving soldiers trying to crawl away. Empty, hot brass casings rained onto the wooden floorboards, burning into the wood. Beside him, Alara fired her 9mm pistol. She shot with cold, clinical precision. She aimed for the soft gaps in the enemy body armor, targeting exposed necks and legs. Boyd worked the heavy bolt of his hunting rifle. Every time his weapon boomed, a Vanguard soldier dropped lifeless into the snow. The air inside the cabin was thick and choking with cordite and wood dust. Suddenly, a stray bullet punched straight through the heavy logs. It struck Boyd in the side. He grunted deeply and fell back against the wooden table, dropping his rifle. Alara instantly dropped her empty pistol. She slid across the floorboards. She pulled a thick gauze pad from her trauma kit and pressed it brutally hard against Boyd's bleeding ribs. "Keep heavy pressure on this," she ordered the old man. She grabbed a fresh magazine from her pocket and slammed it into her gun. Beckett scrambled back through the shattered back door. He was covered in white snow and sharp wood splinters. He was panting heavily, his chest heaving. He grabbed a spare 12-gauge shotgun from the table and pumped the action. The surviving Vanguard soldiers finally retreated down the hill. They dragged their screaming wounded through the bloody snow. The killbox had worked perfectly. The initial assault was completely crushed. Vance dropped his empty rifle magazine. He reached into his chest rig. His freezing fingers met empty canvas pockets. He looked at the wooden table. There were no more cardboard boxes of green-tip ammunition. Alara racked her pistol slide. The steel mechanism locked back entirely. She had 0 rounds left. Boyd leaned heavily against the log wall, clutching his bleeding side. His leather ammunition belt was empty. The sudden silence in the cabin was terrifying. It was broken only by the crackling of the massive forest fire burning just below their ridge. Down in the dark valley, the loudspeaker crackled to life once more. Declan Haig did not sound calm anymore. His voice was raw with absolute fury. "Burn them out," Haig roared. "Total assault. Leave no survivors." Heavy mortar tubes thumped in the distance. The shrill, terrifying whistle of incoming artillery shells cut through the cold night air, descending straight toward the cabin roof. Chapter 6. The Spark in the Dark. The shrill whistle of the incoming mortar shell dropped an octave. That meant the artillery was no longer falling through the sky. It was right on top of them. "Down!" Vance roared. He grabbed Beckett by the collar of his winter coat. He threw his son toward the center of the room. Boyd kicked the heavy braided rug aside with his heavy boot. He hauled open a thick wooden trapdoor built directly into the floorboards. The root cellar, Boyd shouted over the deafening noise. "Get in now!" Ilara shoved Beckett down into the dark hole. She grabbed Boyd by his good arm and pulled him down next. Vance dove in last, dragging the heavy oak trapdoor shut just as the mortar shell struck the roof of the cabin. The explosion was catastrophic. The shockwave hit the ground with the force of a freight train. The thick log walls splintered instantly. The cast-iron wood stove shattered into heavy, lethal shrapnel. A massive fireball sucked all the oxygen out of the air above them. The wooden floorboards caved in, raining burning splinters, hot ash, and heavy stones down into the shallow root cellar. Vance covered Ilara and Beckett with his own body. The pressure wave compressed his lungs. For 10 agonizing seconds, the entire mountain seemed to violently shake. Then came the heavy, suffocating silence. Vance opened his eyes. The root cellar was pitch black. The air was incredibly thick with gray wood dust and the harsh, chemical smell of military cordite. He coughed, spitting grit from his mouth. "Are you hurt?" Vance rasped. His voice was raw. "I am whole," Ilara coughed from the dark. "Beckett is breathing." Boyd groaned heavily. "A support beam fell on my bad leg. I am pinned." Vance pushed himself up. He shoved a heavy piece of burning floorboard off his back. He reached up and pushed against the ruined trapdoor. It was buried under hundreds of pounds of collapsed roof. "Help me push," Vance said. Ilara stood beside him. They planted their boots in the dirt floor and shoved upward with everything they had left. The broken wood shifted. Cold night air rushed into the cellar, instantly feeding the smoldering fires above. They scrambled out of the hole into the freezing night. The cabin was completely gone. Only a smoking crater of burning logs and shattered glass remained. Vance turned back and grabbed Boyd by the shoulders. He hauled the heavy old man out of the dirt cellar. Boyd collapsed into the snow, clutching his bleeding side. A sharp, metallic voice echoed up from the dark valley. It was the heavy loudspeaker on Declan Haig's armored truck. "Cease fire," Haig ordered. "Move the assault team up the chute. Check the bodies. I want their heads on pikes at the town square by dawn." "They are coming," Beckett whispered. "We have no ammunition," Ilara said. Her voice was flat and clinical. She looked at Vance. "This is it." Vance looked at the burning ruins of the cabin. Then he looked up. Above the destroyed structure stood a massive, towering spire of solid granite. It hung directly over the narrow, steep trail that the Vanguard soldiers were currently climbing. "It is not over," Vance said. When he built the kill box an hour ago, he did not just place bombs on the ground. He was a structural engineer. He understood load-bearing columns. He understood how a single fracture could bring down an entire bridge. He had taken his final steel pipe bomb, packed tight with Boyd's black powder, and jammed it deep into a natural fault line at the base of the granite spire. "I need the battery," Vance said. He fell to his knees in the deep snow. He dug frantically near the edge of the porch. "Where is the wire?" Heavy boots crunched on the frozen trail. The Vanguard soldiers were close. Vance could hear the metallic clatter of their weapons and their heavy, ragged breathing. They were 30 yards away, moving up the steep chute. Vance brushed away a pile of ash. He found a thin spool of green copper wire. He had stripped the ends bare. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a rectangular 9-volt battery. It was his emergency flashlight backup. "Get back!" Vance yelled. He grabbed Ilara and Beckett, dragging them behind a large, smoking log. The first Vanguard scout crested the hill. He raised his thermal rifle scope, aiming directly at Vance's chest. Vance jammed the 2 bare copper wires hard against the positive and negative terminals of the battery. A sharp spark illuminated his bloody hands. High above them, the base of the granite spire flashed bright orange. A sharp, cracking sound echoed through the night. It did not sound like an explosion. It sounded like the earth itself was breaking in half. The Vanguard scout froze. He looked up. Thousands of tons of solid rock sheared away from the mountain face. The massive granite spire slowly tipped forward, pulling dead trees and tons of packed ice with it. Then, gravity took over. The avalanche hit the narrow chute with an apocalyptic roar. The Vanguard assault squad had nowhere to run. The sheer volume of falling rock crushed them instantly. The landslide swept down the mountain, ripping massive pine trees out by their roots. It filled the narrow trail completely, creating an impassable 50-foot wall of jagged stone, dirt, and splintered wood. The ground shook so violently that Vance was thrown onto his back. A thick cloud of white snow and gray rock dust washed over the ridge, completely blinding them. The terrible rumbling lasted for 2 full minutes. When the dust finally began to settle, Vance stood up. The mountain pass was gone. A massive barricade of granite now separated the high ridge from the valley below. Down in the dark woods, the armored trucks threw their heavy engines into reverse. The loud grinding of transmission gears echoed through the trees. Declan Haig grabbed his loudspeaker one last time. His smooth, calculated tone was completely gone. He was screaming, his voice cracked with absolute rage and humiliation. "You cannot hide up there forever, Tolliver. I will burn this entire mountain range to ash. I will hunt you to the end of the earth." The diesel engines revved higher. The convoy turned around and retreated toward Miller Valley, leaving their dead buried under the rocks. Vance stood at the edge of the cliff. The freezing wind blew the heavy smoke away from his face. Dawn was breaking over the Cascade Mountains. A thin sliver of pale gray light touched the horizon, illuminating the brutal devastation around them. Boyd limped forward. He leaned heavily on his good leg. He looked at the smoking crater where his cabin had stood for 20 years. All his supplies, his food, and his shelter were gone. "I am sorry about your home," Alara said softly. She walked over and checked the bloody bandage on his ribs. Boyd spat a dark wad of tobacco into the snow. "It was just wood and nails," the old man grunted. "It kept me alive this long. Now it is gone." Vance did not look at the destroyed cabin. He kept his eyes fixed on the distant tracks of the retreating Vanguard trucks. For 3 weeks, he had lived in pure terror. He had believed Declan Haig was an invincible force of nature. He had believed the Rogue Militia could simply take whatever they wanted, kill whoever they wanted, and face zero consequences. But as Vance looked down at the dark red blood staining the white snow below the barricade, a cold, hard clarity washed over his mind. "They are not invincible," Vance said. His voice was a low rumble. Ilara walked to his side. She looked at the tracks leading back to town. "They have an army, Vance. We have absolutely nothing. We need to keep walking north. We need to find safety." "There is no safety," Vance replied. He turned to face his wife. "If we run, we will spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. Haig will never stop. He will take the next town. Then the next." Boyd pulled a heavy hunting knife from his belt. He wiped the soot from the blade. "Where do we go then, city boy?" "We do not go anywhere," Vance said. He picked up his empty rifle from the snow. "Haig came up this mountain, expecting to slaughter sheep. He lost half his men. He lost his best tracking dogs. We made him bleed. If he can bleed, he can die." Boyd stared at Vance for a long time. The old hermit saw the change in the younger man's eyes. The civil engineer was gone. The pacifist was dead. The man standing in the snow was hardened, ruthless, and completely focused. Boyd nodded slowly. "My arm is useless right now," he said, "but I know these mountains better than any man alive. I know where the old logging camps are hidden. I know where we can regroup. I am coming with you." Vance looked at Beckett. His son stood straight, holding the empty shotgun. The fear in the boy's eyes had been entirely burned away by the fires of the night. He had survived. Vance loaded his last empty magazine into the rifle and let the bolt slam forward. It was a hollow, metallic sound, but it rang like a declaration of war in the cold morning air. The vow was no longer just to run. It was a promise to stop hiding in the shadows, to turn back toward the valley, and to become the absolute fire that would burn the Rogue Militia to the ground.